The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
The water crisis deepens as more than 24 Chicago public schools test positive for elevated lead levels. What are school and city officials doing to fix the problem? And Governor Rauner confirms he is running for a second term. What does that mean for the deadlock in Springfield? Plus, roll out the barrel. Chicago's craft beer scene is hopping like never before. Why the Windy City has become the Midwest's mecca for beer lovers. Stay with us for this story and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. 3 weeks ago, In the Loop did an in-depth report about lead in our drinking water. Since then, a growing number of Chicago public schools, nearly 30% of them, have tested positive for high levels of lead in drinking fountains. The findings have prompted public hearings to address the concerns parents have about the water their children drink at school.
What we want is an assurance that this is the priority.
Richard Myers, who will be sending his daughter to Jameston Elementary on the Northwest Side this fall, spoke up during a sparsely attended public hearing at Mather High School in West Rogers Park. School CEO Forrest Claypool assured Myers and other parents that cost is not an issue when it comes to providing safe drinking water for Chicago school children. But Claypool did not say where the financially strapped district would get the money.
We are spending whatever it takes to remove any devices or any piping that might pose a lead hazard risk.
CPS officials, along with the city's health and water departments, are about halfway finished with testing hundreds of schools throughout Chicago. Nearly 1/3 were found to have lead amounts exceeding federal standards.
About 30% have shown at least one fixture that is above the EPA's recommended 15 parts per billion.
That limit, 15 parts per billion, was established 25 years ago. Despite that threshold set by the EPA, the government agency admits its own limits are too high and that no amount of lead is safe, especially for children. It can lead to behavior and learning problems, lower IQ and hyperactivity, hearing loss, and anemia. Just last week, the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a report calling for tighter rules on lead exposure and said existing lead standards fail to protect children. The few people who did attend the public hearing seemed satisfied with how CPS is handling the situation, including community activist Sandra Loss, who lives on the Northwest Side.
So I'm glad that, Chicago took the bull by the horns and has taken action, as opposed to waiting for the, U.S. guidelines and all this kind of stuff.
But Richard Myers is not convinced by what he heard at the public hearing. He still has concerns about his kids using the drinking fountain at their school.
They're going to be starting this fall into the Chicago public schools, and I'm probably going to be sending water with them.
CPS is now testing all 324 schools that were built before 1986, the year lead water pipes were banned in the city. And the Chicago Health Department is recommending that all children be tested for lead. Joining us now to talk more about the lead and the water crisis and other trending stories are Mays Jackson, political analyst with the Intelligence Group, Angel Garcia, President Emeritus for the Chicago Young Republicans, and Saul Flores, Executive Director of the community-based organization La Casa Norte, and welcome, everyone. So we heard Forrest Claypool say that CPS is sparing no expense. Mays, how important is it for the city to get this right?
I think it's tremendously important for the city to get this right. I think that we've seen how this crisis has exploded in Flint, Michigan, and the last thing the city of Chicago needs is an explosion. Chicago Public Schools is imploding financially, and now what else can be added? I think they've had to do a lot to make sure that this thing is taken care of properly.
And Angel, does it appear they are on the right track?
Well, I think they are on the right track. I think it's very important, and of course they have to get in front of this. But I think the bigger issue is, what is wrong with CPS? They failed to educate our kids. Too many kids are failing, not graduating, and now they're not keeping our children safe. So I think it's a bigger issue of the management of CPS.
And Saul, for parents who are going to be sending their kids back to school, we hope in the fall, we'll talk more about that later, should they be confident that that water is safe?
Well, it's pretty frightening. I don't have children, but I have an 8-year-old niece in the 3rd grade. And I would recommend that we take bottled water now until we are clear. And here's the thing, we should be overly confident that the drinking water is safe. And I think it's incumbent upon the administrators to get us there.
You know, when this story first broke, it seemed as if city officials were saying, look, this is limited to a handful of schools on the south and west side. Now, as this testing progresses, it appears it's a citywide issue, nearly 1 in 3 schools, every single neighborhood. And Mays, did the city downplay the significance of this?
I think the city definitely downplayed the significance. I think that when you look at the comments that perhaps the governor has made and just everything that has happened with CPS and how they're trying to portray it as a great institution, but we continue to see structural flaws and structural errors. And so I think what we've got to do here is really take a holistic look at CPS, look at the whole thing, and really try and figure out solutions. And I don't think it's just going to be based I don't think we can just take one-off approaches.
Angel?
Well, totally correct. We have to start from the bottom up. CPS has failed, and I think we have to look at what ways we can restructure it and making structural changes because our children are our biggest asset, and this is unacceptable.
And Chris, you know, I think I pay $16,000 additional a year to send my kids to private school to try and make sure that they're safe, to make sure that the schools are opening on time. And this crisis is just one more reason why I think we really have to examine what we have going on at CPS. This is water. It's food, water, and shelter are like the most basic things.
I think it's also, though, it speaks to other public infrastructure issues. So this goes beyond our school buildings, right? I mean, we need to examine, is it water safe in our neighborhoods? You know, what's happening at the park districts? I mean, what's happening with our police stations? Other facilities that the public takes as being a safe place to be and spend time with their family.
We have big political news this week. Governor Rauner has said, in sort of a quiet way, actually, that he is going to run for re-election in 2018. Does that change the dynamic in Springfield?
No, I don't think it changes the dynamic in Springfield at all. I think it actually digs them in further and everybody gets entrenched in their sides. I think that the governor, as wildly unpopular as he is here in Chicago, when you get outside of Chicago and you get to the collar counties and you get to downstate, I think that what we really start to see is that a lot of the blame, even though Chicago is the economic generator, downstate they also see it as part of the big problem. Well, and then you look at and you look at this CPS crisis and they say, yet here again, see, there they go again.
Well, I think you're totally right. We saw a Capital Facts poll which showed that the burbs and outside of Chicago squarely puts the blame on Michael Madigan, not Rauner. So maybe there's people thinking, you know, Rauner doesn't pick up any seats. Maybe he's not going to run again. So it's a strong time for him to say, you know what, you're going to deal with me again.
So you're saying he's doing this because Democrats were going to wait him out?
Well, that was one thing. Now he's taking that off the table. You're not waiting me out. I am running again. And outside of the city, so far, I am very, very popular. So I think part of that was saying we can say it now, so that's not an option. You're not going to wait me out. I'm running again.
But I don't think that the governor can win without the city as well. I mean, certainly portions of the city that have supported him. And I think up until now, he's going to have a hard case to prove what has he been able to successfully govern.
But I think that's not necessarily the case. I think when you look at the elections, Pat Quinn lost every county in the state and still won with Chicago. Conversely, Bruce Rauner lost Cook County and won virtually every other township downstate. So I think there's a balance. I think you got a 1-2 thing going on. But what I think you have to look at is Rauner saying that he stays in that position locks down the Republican legislators who might have thought about going off the ranch because, hey, they thought there was the process of waiting this guy out. Now he says, I'm here to stay and I got millions to spend.
Speaker Madigan this week, for the 3rd week in a row, canceled the session in Springfield. Does that give us more hope or less for some kind of a deal as we are now just about a full year without a budget?
So I think it gives us less. Election is coming up, and what we're seeing is a lack of controversial votes. And why would that change now with the summer coming and then elections coming? So I think now what we're trying to do, we're now playing a trench warfare game where we're getting ready for election time. And that means Madigan's people aren't going to be able to have these votes. They're controversial. So at this point, Madigan's going to blame Rauner. Rauner's going to blame Madigan. And I think we're going to be stuck without a budget until Election Day.
And the big question, though, what does that mean for schools? That's going to be the million-dollar question.
That's exactly right. And the body count just continues to pile up. We're going to celebrate 365 days of no budget. And as someone who works in community with teachers, with social workers, with the elderly, homeless, and poor, I say shame on all three major leaders, right? They've not done their job. And, we're asking them to get it done.
Let's move to the city desk, City Hall. Big meeting yesterday. A lot of legislation went through, including movement on the rental economy, both in ride sharing and Airbnb. A compromise on ride sharing, Mays. It looks like the deal means no fingerprinting for the Uber and Lyft drivers. They're going to have to get some kind of a license. Who's the winner here?
I think that what you see, the winner here is going to be ultimately Uber and the ride-sharing economy. I think that what you'll also see is that we're also going to see the demise of the actual fingerprint test. Mark Brown did a great story in the Sun-Times today, but they're going to revisit this fingerprinting ID, and if the Uber drivers do not have to submit to it, then most of the city services or most of the people that have opportunities in the city to do that will probably not in 6 months be doing fingerprinting as well.
Uber and Lyft threatened to leave if they didn't get their way. Did that threat work?
Oh, I think absolutely it did. I think we look at millennials, they love this app. And I think that just the jobs it brings and the people it serves, I think in the inner city, so many people I know are able to get an Uber ride within 3 minutes, but they have to wait an hour to get a cab ride if you're on the south or west side of Chicago. So I think the consumer won here, and I think it's a big victory.
But for taxi cab drivers, still a big difference. They have to get the regular chauffeur license, go through, get a medallion or rent from a medallion. Is there still an uneven footing here in the city between the ride sharing and the taxi services?
Well, I mean, there still has to be, there are some background checks that Uber and Lyft drivers are going through. And I think they, even pushed back and said, well, let's deregulate the taxis as well. Sort of let's blow this up and make it an even playing field. I mean, here's the deal. I think consumer protection is absolutely important. Alderman Beal said, we're going to look at this again in 6 months, whether that's true or not, whether fingerprinting goes away, as me suggested. But I want to go back to something that Angel said. I can't tell you how many times I live in Humboldt Park that I don't even put my butt in the seat of a taxi, and I open the door and I say, I'm going to Humboldt Park. And I let him say, or her say, yes or no, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not available.
That's illegal.
That's absolutely illegal. But here's the thing, Chris, I have a lot of things to do, and that's probably 150th on my list before I can report them. So at the end of the day, when I think about compromise, what's important to consumers, the fact that my parents or grandparents who are elderly on the west side of Chicago, that I could call reliable transportation from them and get them to a place of safety is more important.
The other part of the rental economy that the City Council dealt with was Airbnb, renting out one's home or apartment, and it seems that the City Council approved the mayor's version, which is friendly to Airbnb, and some of the aldermen were upset because they wanted more regulation.
Well, I think that really what we have to do is really start to adjust to this app-based economy that is being generated. And as Chicago rapidly becomes a hub for technology companies, we're going to see things like this all the time. What I find disingenuous about kind of all these things is at the lower level, we're having the low-level debates of, hey, we're providing cabs and services in these underrepresented neighborhoods that haven't been able to have these services. But we never ask the question at the top level of, well, where do these same communities participate at the economic level of this? And so I think that as we talk about these app-based economies, I think that Airbnb and all these guys are great, but how do we capture that and make it a benefit to the city?
The mayor got his way. There was a lot of talk earlier in the year that the city council was going to be independent and that they were going to rise up, but it looks like the rubber stamp is back.
Well, we haven't seen an independent city council since before Daley. So I think it's more of the same. And we've seen that maybe on this issue, Rom got his way, but it was really I thought a really strong grassroots effort by Uber, Lyft, Airbnb to have people call their aldermen. So there was some pressure there. And it seems that the only aldermen that were against it were the people that had many hotels in their areas and people that were working with the taxi lobby. So I think at the end, maybe overall we still have a rubber stamp, but I think this was a very strategic move by the sharing economy to lobby and have people call their aldermen.
I think there's also some community-based initiatives here. I participated as a nonprofit organization for over a year lobbying the mayor to find more service dollars for the homeless service sector. And this 4% surcharge gets us there. And that was a collaborative effort that we were happy to take part in and stand with the mayor in that perspective because it brought more resources to the table. And so Mays, you talk about how our people on the west side and south side who are struggling with the loss of state funds, we're now going to have an influx of $2+ million that wasn't there 2 days ago before the ordinance passed.
We have to move on to one other big story. The Department of Justice started hearings this week on its investigation of the Chicago Police Department. The first hearing held this week, last night, at Kennedy King College, and quite a few people were upset, including the mother of a child whose son was shot by police. Let's listen to what she had to say.
I was terrified when I see the police. I don't know whether I should get down and crawl like a dog, or just be a woman or be a human being. You all know what's going on. Stop it. Stop it. We all human beings. Stop it. Save us. Please help us. Can anybody help us?
The Department of Justice got quite an earful. And Mays, why are these hearings important?
I fundamentally, I think they are to let the air out of the balloon. I don't know how effective that these Justice Department hearings are, and I don't know how necessarily credible they are to representatives of the community. I think they are great opportunities to blow off steam, but will they affect structural change? I don't know. I think it gives the mayor some cover, and I think it gives all of the police some cover, but I'm not really confident that this is going to be. I think they've got some significant credibility issues in general.
Can we expect some changes, some profound changes out of the Department of Justice investigation here, Angel?
So the problem is probably it is huge, and I think probably not. And here's why. I think when we look at what needs to be done, and no one talks about this, is police immunity laws. So that's something that legal minds can talk about. How can we change that? But nobody talks about police immunity laws. And number two, the union. So unless we make changes with the police union and with immunity laws, everything else is just around the edges. So there's some very big things that have to change. The Justice Department may help, but until we talk about immunity laws and changes in the police union, it'll be very difficult to have any real change.
Saul, we've seen this in other cities where the Department of Justice has come in, issued a series of consent decrees forcing police departments to make changes. What do they need to do here in Chicago?
Well, I think that some of the recommendations that the mayor heard from this community policing task force were very loud and clear, and that's the complete elimination of IPRA as it stands today.
This is the Independent Police Review Authority.
Yes, sorry for the acronym. Yes, and transparency with a capital T. I agree with Mays. It's a great way to blow off steam, but I don't think this goes away. I mean, this is the thing, right? I mean, communities, we are at a grip. People are fearful, and this is touching everybody, right? I mean, folks who are not just on the south or west side, not just people who are black and brown who have been personally touched, but people care that children, right, that teens are not safe. And I don't think this goes away.
This week, the city of Chicago put almost 100 new police officers out on the street. Mays, drop in the bucket or something meaningful?
I think it's a drop in the bucket, but I think if we're really going to talk about meaningful change, I really think we do have to talk about the culture. The police culture. I think just dropping more police into neighborhoods doesn't necessarily help us if there's no community understanding and there's a community disconnect. And I feel like that's fundamentally what's happening. What I think we've got to do is really look at the merit system and look at the promotions and look at who's in those middle management jobs. You see all this focus on the commanders and at Eddie Johnson, but we really have to look at the sergeants and the lieutenants, and how are we getting the right people into those spots, because those are the people that are going to make the everyday decisions that will not allow these things to happen.
We've seen the new superintendent, Eddie Johnson, get out in the community more. We're seeing these meetings in the precincts. Angel, do you sense a real difference between Johnson and his predecessor or not?
Well, I think there has to be a difference. I think he's trying. I think he knows he has to get ahead of it. Post video Laquan. Obviously, things have changed, and obviously, we have to go into community, and the police have to do that. Now, will that make any real change? I think you're correct. When we look at how do people get promoted, that still comes down to the unions. When we look at the recent data of police officers who have been accused of wrongdoing, it's the unions that say, well, after 1 year, 2 years, we're not letting that go. You're not going to know that. So there's some structural changes that need to be done. I think they're trying, obviously. I'm just concerned that it's not going to be enough.
Finally, we have big news in the sports world. Derrick Rose, the superstar, is being traded to New York Knicks. Sol, bittersweet moment for Chicago here?
It is. I think anytime Chicago loses a hometown hero or something to celebrate, those of us still call it Sears Tower and still think it's the tallest building. But certainly I think, something sad. I think he's a hero, though, that many young people, every color around the world can look up to. And
Maze,
I wish him best of luck.
Why did his story resonate? Here's the Chicago kid, South Side.
I mean, he came from Inglewood. He goes to college 1 year, makes it to the finals. We get the #1 pick. We get Derrick Rose. How does that happen? And he's in as the Rookie of the Year. He's MVP, and he crashes. And you're like, God, don't let it happen again. And I'm going to be honest with you. I am really hurt that Derrick Rose is gone because I thought this was his year. We just didn't give him his chance to come back.
Angel, last word is going to be for you.
Derrick Rose, Chicago hero. But I think it was time for a divorce. I think we look at what happened.
To New York.
He wasn't the same player that he used to be. So maybe it might be best for both sides to have a divorce.
And it sounds like a sad divorce for most of Chicago. Thanks to our guests, Maze Jackson, Angel Garcia, and Sol Flores. Chicago is emerging as a national leader in the exploding business of craft beer. The second city is second only to Portland, Oregon, in the number of craft breweries, more than 150. And according to Cranes, more commercial real estate is devoted to independent brewing here than in any other city in the country. In Chicago, watering holes like Vice District Brewing are cranking out beers to meet every taste and budget. Vice, now nearly 2 years old, is a microbrewery and tap room in the South Loop. Co-owners Curtis Tarver and Quentin Cole consider themselves craft beer geeks. Like many craft beer novices, the pair learned by brewing at home.
We started home brewing just different recipes and enjoyed it, quite frankly. And next thing you know, we're kind of hanging out at the house in our respective basements across the street. He would keep 3 beers on tap. I keep 4 beers on tap, and we just invite people to come to our basement and celebrate with us.
Tarver and Cole made the transition from their homes to this location, where they serve more than 14 house-made beers weekly.
Amanda, our head brewer, makes efficient use of this space, this limited space. This is where all the magic happens. There's nothing sexy about it. I'll be honest with you. This is the unsexy part about beer.
So we try to keep about 5 to 6 staple beers, right? So we start with a Blonde Ale, which is one of our lighter beers. To the other end, a double IPA, right? Which is going to be a much hoppier beer, right? A lot of aroma. I mean, it's going to kind of punch you in the face, quite frankly, when you get near it. But it's a really solid beer. What we try to do is to keep beers for people who may not be into the craft beer space, and then some for people who are in the space, both feet. They've jumped in and they want to taste the most flavorful thing they can.
It can be very difficult to know what separates one beer from another in terms of style. The easiest way to think about it is to divide them into their 2 overarching categories, lagers and ales. Lagers in general tend to be lighter and cleaner in flavor and mouthfeel. Pilsners are a great example of a lager style. Ales in general tend to be heavier in flavor, and a lot of times, especially here in the States, will be darker in color. Porters, stouts, and India Pale Ales are great examples of this category.
Bruce White runs the Chicago Beer Experience. 3 times a week, he gives group tours to those interested in learning about craft beer.
We explore a lot of Chicago history, and we kind of have a beer tie-in there as well. And then, of course, we taste and learn about craft beer during that time. Welcome to Buddy Guys. This place is awesome. Chicago has had a rich beer history even back in the 1800s. We had 54 breweries in the city, 53 of them were run by Germans. Chicago was definitely a big brewing city back in those days. Before the craft beer movement, between 1978 and 1988, no breweries existed in the city, which third largest city in the country. That's pretty ridiculous.
Thanks to trend-setting local breweries including Goose Island, Half Acre, and Revolution, Chicago's craft beer scene is exploding. It helped push national sales past $22 billion in 2015.
These days in craft beer, there's a lot of 1- and 2-year-old breweries that have opened up that are doing new things, and they're bringing new beers and new flavors and tastes to the table, which is important.
Josh Death is managing partner at Revolution Brewing in Logan Square, the largest independent brewery in Illinois. When Revolution opened 6 years ago, it was brewing about 2,000 barrels of beer. Last year, Revolution brewed more than 60,000 barrels.
We definitely had high double-digit growth for a while in our sales. Right now we sell 90% of our beer here in the Chicagoland area, but we're starting to sell in other states around the country.
Beer sales in Chicago last year were $545 million.
Of that $545 million in 2015, craft beer sales account for a large percentage. Major beer companies began noticing the high sales craft brewers were pulling in, took note of the possibilities, and in some cases bought up the smaller competitors. Anheuser-Busch, the nation's biggest brewer, bought Chicago's Goose Island Brewery for $8.8 million. Heineken bought a 50% stake in Lagunitas Brewing Company, which has a large brewery in Chicago.
I think the big brewers like Anheuser-Busch, they definitely see craft beer as a threat, whereas they used to be able to ignore it, think it was like a little fly, and they would just flick it away 10 years ago. And now they've decided that they can't make it themselves, so they're going to go ahead and buy it and join them that way.
Buying bread from a man in Brazos, where he was 6'4" and full of muscle.
The business of craft beer has now become a thriving culture. Craft beer festivals, races, and even yoga classes are popping up around the city. Josh Siegel runs the Chicago Ale Fest.
Chicago Ale Fest is a 2-day American craft beer festival that takes place at Buckingham Fountain. It's one of the larger craft beer festivals in the city. We'll bring in over 100 different brewers, 220 different beers, live music, local food, all in one place.
I made sure to come here this year, just to have a chance to taste the various beers and experience it. And it's also part of being in Chicago. Chicago's really embracing the craft brewing and the craft beer industry. So I just wanted to be a part of that.
Craft beer festivals are all about the experience. And don't get me wrong, you have to have great craft beer at a craft beer festival. But really it comes down to the experience.
And that experience is one Josh Death does not see tapping out anytime soon.
It's not a bubble that's going to burst. It's not like people are suddenly going to start switching back to drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon after they've been drinking craft beer IPAs. It's like once you get that flavor on your taste buds, it's hard to go back.
And thanks for joining us. Until next week, I'm Chris Bury.